Good morning. I'm Daisy Lehman, and I am this year's board chair for City Club of Central Oregon. I'd like to thank you all for being here bright and early this morning. Unlike January, it's actually daylight out, so there's that. Thank you so much. If you are a member or a sponsor, if you could raise your hand, please. Like a round of applause, please, to our members and our sponsors. Those of you know, City Club could not operate. Our fees to attend forums don't cover our own costs, and it is through the generosity of our members and our sponsors that we are able to bring programming like this to you. So I wanted to thank you all. Also wanted to mention a milestone that's coming up this year. In December, it will be 20 years since the first City Club, and we are really excited about celebrating our City Club's 20-year anniversary. One thing that we're doing, and we are implementing a fundraising drive, we are hoping to do today is Aaron Switzer. He is the publisher of The Source and the producer of Lay It Out events, and he is a highly valued member of our City Club board. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you, and I'll let you get started.
All right. Thank you all. If you're like me, it was a challenge waking up early and managing to get here. If you're not an early riser, thank you again for making it. Today we are, Jason is being a good dad. He was running a little bit late and dropping his daughter off at school, so he will be joining us as soon as he is able. Today we are grateful to have senators and representatives here today. We have Senator Mike McLean from Senate District 30. Round of applause, please. Senator Anthony Broadman, Senate District 57. Representative Emerson Levy. And as I said, Jason Croft from House District 54 will be joining us. We are going to begin today's forum with an overview of some of the areas that were individual successes for the legislators in areas of concern for our region. I'm going to start with legislator Emerson Levy. Emerson, one of your priority bills was HB 414, the Safe Battery Recycling Act. And I spoke to you at a fundraiser about this, and your energy for batteries was palpable. Could you give the audience an overview of what HB 4144 entails?
Absolutely. Let people think I'm a little bit cool. Actually, I'm so excited about this bill because it came, I think it's a great example of great public policy. So where are my best bills come from, or our best bills come from when the community comes to us and says, we have a problem, can you fix it? And this is one of those examples where you're talking to the waste management people at county, and they said, we all of a sudden have these lithium batteries in our waste stream, and they're causing fires. Last year we had 54 fires at the landfill, and it cost about $10,000 to put the fires out. And it's because of the increase in lithium batteries that burn at an incredibly high temperature. So you put them in pressure, and then they also do that. You guys get it, right? Visualize it. But they also do that on trucks because people don't know that those little tiny batteries, at 1,000 degrees, and so you can pack the paper on recycling truck and they catch on fire. And so at the metro station in Portland, there's about 4 fires a month on the trucks. So how do we fix this, right? First, education, but how we do it right now is a patch mill system. Because when I said we created this battery recycling program, people say, well, we already have one. We do, but this is the better version of it. So it's called producer responsibility. So the manufacturer of the battery will now be responsible for collecting those batteries. And then what happens is, and why it's a cost savings, is when we do that on an economy of scale, then the producer can recycle that lithium and those precious metals, cobalt, whatever, for profit to negate the cost of the recycling. So we're in part of part of the program is also to have education so people know that, hey, this little lithium battery, make sure you recycle it, don't leave it in your garage. So that'll be our next step is education and then building out this program. So I'm super jazzed. Yeah.
Emerson, do you have resistance to this kind of program?
You know, in the beginning, I think there was a little bit of resistance because I think it was kind of, do we need this? And so what we really spent, we brought this bill last year, and then we brought it back, which was a great thing for the short session, was to really define the problem. And so we were able to have waste haulers come in and say, our trucks are catching on fire. And once we really said, here's the problem, this isn't just like a nice to have, like that's a real problem our communities and it comes on your garbage bill are having, it was really easy for that.
Senator McLean, I learned something in doing some research for this question. You worked on something called corner crossing, which was new to me. Could you explain what corner crossing is and why it's important?
Sure.
Mike.
How about now? Okay. Jason Crop, ladies and gentlemen.
Good dad.
A good dad. Yeah. Well, I'm Mike McLean. I live in Powell Butte. I work in Bend at a law firm, and my district covers clear over to Malheur County and Baker County, Grant, Harney, Lake, Crook, and then everything north of like 126 and Redmond and everything including Madras south. So that's District 30, and it's 43% of the land mass of Oregon. So it's a large district, same amount of population as Anthony's district, where I'm sure most of you are from. But so out where I live and represent folks, also in Southern Oregon, we have a lot of checkerboard type of ownership. So if you think of a chessboard or a checkerboard, and all the black squares are government land and the red squares are private land. So you get a checkerboard mix. And sometimes those are 160 acres, sometimes 320. They're all based upon this survey of sections back in the day. And so what you have is when folks are navigating the outdoors, whether it's hunting or hiking, and they're sticking to public lands, they come to a corner. And so they cross the corner, and there became an issue with that in another state, a little bit here too, where the private landowners were saying, hey, that's in essence trespass on my land. And we had some rascals out there in Wyoming where they set up little barriers, and these guys were archery hunting. And this actually was a case went up to the 10th Circuit, where they said, look, even if you step just on the public land, you know exactly where the corner is, you're in the airspace above the private land. And so that's trespass. Went up to the 10th Circuit, and they interpreted a couple of federal statutes, one that was passed in the 1800s and one early 1900s, where you can't interfere with access to public lands, et cetera. And so the state trespass laws were trumped in essence by the supremacy of the federal law, so that corner crossing was clear. As long as you don't leave a footprint or impact the private land, you can maintain public access. So one of the things that Senator Broadman and I are aligned on, and there are many, but one of the things that we are access to public land. So Anthony and I co-sponsored a bill, 1545, to say, hey, in Oregon, we want to be clear. If you cross and you don't impact that private land, that is not trespass. And we both felt very strongly that we want the public to have access to public lands. And so we put in the bill. Anthony also had a different bill about access to public lands, so I'll let him explain that. I eventually voted for it. But in this particular bill, the opposition was by some large landowners who had really horrible stories about trespassers and people who weren't good actors. And so we realized there were two issues. One, not everyone knows exactly where that corner is, and they have this GPS system called Onyx, which is not necessarily pinpointed. And so we wanted to be able to deal with the fact that not all boundaries are marked. And then number two, the sanctions on people who knowingly trespass, we weren't sure if they were really working in a way that a lot of the landowners were describing the problem. We gave in that bill immunity to the landowners that says, hey, if you're hurt corner crossing, you pull a hammy or whatever, you can't sue the landlord. So it was a bill that was, I think, generally popular and had lots of votes, and everyone here was supportive. But we pulled it back, and Anthony and I are going to work sitting down with all the interest holders over this summer and fall and work out language that is a good compromise. And I think that's the way you should do it, is that when you are trying to bring clarity to the law, and there are interests that don't feel A, heard, or B, that don't think the language is right, then you pause and you sit down, you work to consensus. And so we'll bring it back in 2027.
Senator Broadman, you placed a lot of energies in the area of public land protection. Specifically, you sponsored SB 1590. This bill prohibits state agencies from using public resources to assist the federal government in the privatization of federal lands, such as hiking trails and campgrounds. Why did Oregon need this now? Why you?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So I'll talk about the public lands promise, and then I'll talk about the larger landscape of the work we did this year in the legislature to combat, at the very least, chaos out of Washington, D.C. The public lands promise is modeled after the sanctuary promise, which just prevents state and local actors from assisting the federal government with immigration enforcement. And at a time when DC interests are looking to privatize, to essentially take national monuments, national forests, national parks, it was important to signal to the United States that you're not going to be able to do this with Oregon's help. We value our public land. We value what makes the Oregon in so many ways, and that's our access to the outdoors. The public lands promise is part of a larger effort that I think you saw out of the short session this year, which was to stand up against efforts in Washington, D.C. that are making our life less safe, making our life more expensive, violating our due process rights, at least for me, violating my values of what it means to be an American and what it means to raise your kids in a safe community. So the public lands promise, which was bipartisan, and many of these bills were bipartisan. Many of them weren't. And, I think if you look at that, it's 9+ bills giving Oregonians a cause of action to pursue violations of their rights against the federal government, ensuring that law enforcement are identified and wearing masks, including federal officers when they're enforcing the law in Oregon, making sure that if ICE is coming into a school, that families and teachers know that that's occurring, and protecting hospitals from improper or overbroad immigration enforcement to the extent we're able to under state law. And I think when you look at those 9 bills, I certainly put the public lands promise in there. This isn't necessarily a Trump problem, but we have a DC problem when it comes to understanding what our public lands mean to us as Westerners, understanding what our public lands mean to us as Central Oregonians, and that they are not for sale, they are not to be exploited willy-nilly, that we are stewards of these lands and these waters and this air here in a way that's part of who we are. So that was the reason for the bill.
Great. Representative Croft, as a member of the House Judiciary Committee, you did some significant work in crafting legislation as a result of the federal initiative in Oregon on immigration. Something Anthony John, what was the result?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. So I'm Jason Krupp, State Representative for House District 54 here in Bend. Yeah, so much of the work we did this session was balancing our budget in response to what happened on the federal level, and then what can we do to sort of push back on what we're seeing coming from the Trump administration. And there was kind of a couple different things that came through the House Judiciary Committee. One was about healthcare, which was about protecting our medical providers and doctors from federal overreach in other states as they change their reproductive health laws from lawsuits and potential criminal charges from other states. Two was backfilling. The federal government actually cut specifically targeted Planned Parenthood, so Planned Parenthood can be reimbursed when they provided regular healthcare service, so non-abortion healthcare services to folks, and we backfilled that funding for like preventative care, contraception, and other healthcare that Planned Parenthood provides. And then a large bucket, what we did is to try to combat what we're seeing on immigration enforcement. And honestly, much of what we try to do is just replicate what had been law in this country, in the state for a long time. We are the first state in the nation to have a sanctuary law. And we enacted that in 1987. That worked through 7 presidential administrations from Reagan on forward, Republican and Democrat, including the first Trump administration. And honestly, simply all that says is immigration enforcement is a federal responsibility, not a state responsibility. And the law of the land for a long time had been hospitals and schools, like Anthony talked about, have been what we call sensitive spaces or sensitive places. That immigration enforcement wasn't going to happen in our schools and wasn't going to happen in our hospitals. And that had been sort of the federal administrative rule for a long time, right? We want kids to go to school and not be afraid, and parents not to be afraid to drop their kids off at school. And we don't want people to be afraid to go give medical care if they need a hospital setting. And so the work that we did was sort of, I kind of think of a couple different buckets. One, we put an expectation for any law enforcement operating in the state to be clearly identifiable and not masked. That is the way it works for Bend Police Department and the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office and Bend Police Department, right? They wear a uniform. They are not masked unless there's some sort of health need for that. And we just said, we want federal law enforcement to act the same way and live up to the same standards that we have for our local law enforcement. So that was one thing. Two, we tried to do what we could to sort of re-establish that schools and hospitals are going to be safe places, so as much as we could, right? We are hearing stories and examples of people being afraid to go to school, afraid to access healthcare. So we tried to establish rules to make those safe places again. And then, as Anthony talked about, we created a cause of action, especially when somebody violates somebody's constitutional rights as far as entering into somebody's home without a lawful basis or a court order. Being able to pursue a civil cause of action against federal law enforcement. That's already the law of the land when it comes to state law enforcement. If that happens before this time, you can pursue that sort of cause of action if somebody at Bend PD did that. So we thought those rules that apply to our local law enforcement should apply to federal law enforcement. So that's sort of the main bucket we did to try to sort of live up to the Sanctuary Promise Act that we have in the state, and try to reinstate the sort of common sense rules that we've had in this country for a long time before this most recent Trump administration.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So the next part of these questions are open for all of you to respond to. I hope you will. In the past session, I know all of you on some level addressed a crisis in the state's outdoor recreation industry that began after the 2014 Oregon Supreme Court ruling rendered liability waivers largely unenforceable. This led to increased insurance premiums, lack of available coverage for operators in the outdoor recreation industry. Are you happy with the legislation that was passed, and why will Oregonians, specifically Central Oregonians, be better for it? And why don't we start with you, Senator Clay?
Yeah, Senate Bill 1517 was the bill that eventually passed. It's an interesting thing about legislation. I've heard it's a lot like sausage, you know, you don't want to watch it being made. This was one of those bills. And there were 6 lawyers in the legislature, 3 in the Senate, 3 in the House, that were a part of it. There were some others as well. 4 of us are here. So Central Oregon had a disproportionate participation in shaping that bill. And it took a while to get there. Jason, prior to the session, had hosted some time, and the 4 of us went to his office and we started hammering out what we could get done in a short session. And I really appreciate his leadership on that. And we all participated in coming up with language. And I think everybody at some point stepped up and said, well, let's do this. You know, what about this wording? And then after everyone outside the group absolutely hated that version and burned us in effigy at rallies across the state, we eventually were able to focus on a certain bill. We passed out of the Senate a bill that I didn't want to vote for. I'll let Anthony answer that. But we had to have a vehicle, right? So it's always interesting when you take a vote and you say, this bill stinks. Aye. But we wanted to get to Jason and Emerson in the House, the vehicle to amend. So Jason and Emerson had said, hey, look, send it to us and we'll work with you to get it right. And that's what happened. And so relationships matter still today. And so that's where it began. And I'll let someone else describe how we got to the final version.
The way Mike's looking at me, he's like, we all got to see Emerson's spicy stuff.
We got to see the real Emerson behind the scenes.
I am really proud of where we landed, and we're all still talking to each other, so I think that's really great. I think we landed on a good spot that allows waivers, and I think really what got us there in the end was negotiating towards our values, and what was that value that we were negotiating towards, and that is the safety of Oregonians, right? So that was how we were able to get there in the end, and so we have a bill that allows for waivers with certain exceptions and those exceptions deal with safety and making sure that people are safe as they're participating in these sports. So it was cool to hear the insurance companies are just responding to the legislation. So I know we got there in some way and we'll continue to work on it. But I'm proud of how we got there in the end, even though it was hard, and here we are.
Anthony, is that the way it went down?
Yeah, no, they're both absolutely right. And I would say to whether I'm proud of the work. Everybody did amazing work. Representative Krepp's been working on this for a long time, and Representative Levy, well, we wouldn't be here but for her leadership. I would say whether this is the right legislative point that we have landed on, we will know in the future. Do we have people getting hurt and not having recourse in a way that is inconsistent with our expectations about corporations offering recreational activities? Or do we have still what has been described as runaway sort of verdicts and insurance problems, lack of insurability? Most of what we do should be looking for a balance. And I feel like we got to the right spot for 2026. I think this year we're going to be in a better spot. I see insurance coming back to the market. And nothing that we do in the legislature, we should never rest on our laurels. We should always be checking back in. This is not the kind of state where you can pass a bill and then forget about an issue. So I know from the 4 of us and the other folks who worked on this for years, we're going to go back and titrate, recalibrate, rebalance to the extent it's necessary to keep Oregonians safe and to keep recreation affordable in our state.
Want to comment?
Yeah, can I push back on Mike a little bit? Like, so I didn't actually think it was, I didn't really think it was sausage making. Quite honestly, I thought it was a group of bipartisan legislators, like maximizing the 35 days of legislative session. We met pretty much every single day in the session. There's a member lounge where we get to eat lunch, and we would meet for lunch and take 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours and sort of work through this. Now, it was also 6 lawyers probably overanalyzing, coming up with too many different hypotheticals that weren't necessarily based in reality. But there was a bipartisan group of us like grinding through this legislation, building on the work that we had all done, the meetings that we had going into the session. And I think what I am really pleased about this bill is I heard a lot of business owners saying, I want clarity, right? I want clear legal standards. And what we aspire to do was say, make sure it was clear that there's things when we recreate that are just beyond the control of both the participant and the business owner, right? The weather or how the river runs and those types of things. But make sure that we focus on the things that are within the control of the operator, those safety equipment, how you train your employees, like how you train your raft guides, how you train your lift operators. So we try to provide clarity and a focus on those key safety things. And quite honestly, a lot of that came from business owners telling us, here's what I already do, right? We were here, if you're here a few months ago, we had Kate, who owns the Sisters Athletic Club, hadn't had sort of a claim or lawsuit in the 20 plus years he's owned that. He knows how to operate a safe business. A lot of what we did is incorporate what our business owners are already doing and sort of embed those in our statutes.
There was a little bit of criticism that it took a while to get to this point where we passed the legislation. Anyone want to respond to like why it takes so long to reach these kind of conclusions? Or did it take a long time? Was it long?
I've only been there a year, so I will say it didn't feel like it took a long time to me. I would say if it gets to the legislature, it's a tough issue.
Yeah.
Right? You got 91 smart people who are tasked with representing the conscience of our state. If something is worthwhile is worthwhile for us to take up, it's a tough issue. And it should take time. It shouldn't be something that you pop in there and then people are asking, what the heck did the legislature do? They didn't really have the public engagement. They didn't have the stakeholder input. They didn't weigh all the costs and benefits of a particular piece of policy. So I don't, ask me next 2 years into my term, but I would say 1 year into my term, this is, this was the appropriate path.
Okay. One thing I'd like to emphasize to folks, this may not be of interest to too many, but in the 5-week session, we had nearly 300 bills introduced, 33,223 testimony submissions, 4,234 people signed up for in-person testimony. When you go over the volume of what the legislature undertook in a 5-week session, it is extraordinarily, it's just a lot. And my hope is that in future short sessions, the leadership of the body, which, in Oregon, one political party runs every facet of the state government. Not my political party. But they, surprise, surprise, are not in agreement. In fact, it's rare when you find they all agree on something. And so it really, regardless of how the presiding officers or the chairs of the committees get in place, I think there needs to be more assertiveness by the chairs to start cutting out. We don't need that as many hearings. We don't need the volume, and allow us to just focus on fewer things. It's a short session. It should just be about very few things, and those things like liability for recreational activity, which is statewide importance. And then we should focus on that. And that's my 2 cents. I hope those who are actual chairs of committees maybe might hear me.
Can I add something really quick there? As we talk about this process was really hard, and complex issues should be hard. But 2 days after the bill passed, I got a text from someone that said one of our small rental companies, their insurance prices were going to go up by 300%. And because of the bill, they were able to offer them the regular rate again. I straight up cried because I love public policy so much, as we've established, but real Leslie Knope energy. But the goal of the government and what we fundamentally believe in is that we care about how our actions impact people. And so for one person, they realized that their government cared about their problem and did something about it. And for me, that's worth all of the things that we go through to just fix people's problems, no matter how we get there.
I would echo much of what everybody here said. There was a complexity to this. Literally every single state approaches this issue slightly differently, some in almost complete stark contrast, either through statute or appellate cases. And so really we had to craft an organ solution to this. And quite honestly, we aspire to do it as broadly as possible, right? If you just wanted to create what the civil legal standards would be for one industry, just ski or just rafting or just a gym, it'd be sort of much easier to tackle sort of one at a time. We decided to tackle both indoor activities and outdoor activities. We decided to tackle what the standards should be when it's an adult participant and a child participant. And so, part of it literally was just the complexity of this and the breadth of the work that we took on is part of what took the time needed to get this piece of legislation passed this session.
Shifting gears, let's discuss the legislative hot potato that is the proposed gas tax. Curious about two parts of this legislation. Do you feel it was appropriate to place this on the May ballot rather than November? And additionally, given the rather dreary outlook for the measure's success at this point, what does this mean for ODOT's future funding? And Emerson,
We'll start with me. So, the first question, was it appropriate to be on the May ballot? So there's two arguments. One is that we need to know earlier what our budget forecast is going to be. We've seen the polling shows about 70% the measure will be repealed. So how we project our budget. And so that was the argument for May, that let's vote as soon as we possibly can. I voted against moving the ballot measure to May. I've never gotten so many emails about a subject that were organic, so say not form emails from people in my district. It was about 200 to 1. And I really pride myself on voting for my district, and I feel like that's what I did, but I also understand the logic of why it needed to be in May for budgetary purposes. So the bigger question is, what are we going to do about ODOT? And how are we going to fund the maintenance costs that are increasing? And the bigger issue is, how are we going to prepare the trust between ODOT and the people of Oregon to know that their work is happening in the way that the Oregonians want? And we know from the feedback that the trust isn't there. So I have two ideas. I'm sure that the good Senator McLean has lots of ideas. So to be like a budget nerd for just a second. So we do our budget as a continuing service level, right? So whatever's in your budget, that's your rollover budget for the next year, right? And so your roll-up costs continue. I think this is a terrible idea. I think that we should do a zero balance budget. Kidsonga did this. They found $2 billion when they did that. And it's an opportunity to shake things around and say, what do we really need to do? And so I think that's the first step in regaining the public's trust on how we spend our dollars in a really public way. Let's zero balance budget every single agency and say, we need to spend these dollars here. And then Indiana does something really cool. So they have an app, and you can see every single project that they are doing and its cost and how it's being built. And so there's a real understanding of where people's dollars are going. So they have a sales tax just for their roads and maintenance, but the people of Indiana can see exactly what is happening with those dollars. And so I think a combination of transparency on the budget side and just kind of, proof of concept, or, showing people as we go along. But that's the budget side. But as far as our ODOT workers, they're doing really great and important work. They keep our passes open. It's been really hard on them. We've lost 15% of ODOT workers because they're nervous about losing their jobs. So we need to make sure the pass is open and our roads are clear, and we've got to deal with this fundamental trust problem that we have. Both of those things are true at once.
I can add a little. I agree with everything Representative Levy just said. I also think zero balance budgeting for ODOT is an approach that we need to use. I also just want to add how important the next director is for ODOT and leadership at the agency that reflects what we all expect, which is that our transportation system is the linchpin for economic development across our state, especially us here. In terms of the May ballot, I voted to move it to the May ballot. It was the right call for me. I've had similar input as Representative Levy. We had a constituent who a couple weeks into the short session wrecked on the other side of San Tian Pass and was killed. And I drove by that car, I think 4 times before it had been cleared. I'm not saying that that's because we didn't fully fund ODOT but our transportation system is how we conduct commerce in and out of Central Oregon. It's how cops get to accidents safely. It's how my wife gets to the hospital safely to take care of babies. It's how all of our kids get to and from school. I couldn't, for myself, and I respect everybody's different approach in this, I couldn't for myself wait another minute than to get this on the ballot, see it go down, because it is going to go down. This tax is not going to take it. And come back to the table and negotiate a bipartisan deal to fund the transportation system, the world-class transportation system that our state deserves. That is going to take 6 more months, and I don't know how many more people are going to get hurt over those 6 months if we don't get this done right now. I know the last thing that the Republicans offered to Democratic leadership on the transportation tax. I know what it was. We need to go back to that starting point and reach a deal because people's lives are hanging in the balance, and we need to do it as quickly as possible. And voting on this in May is the way to do that.
So in 2017, we passed a transportation package, and at the time, I was in the House, and I was the minority leader in the House. And we started negotiating that in 2015. Kate Brown was the governor, Tina Kotek was Speaker of the House, and of course, members of the Senate. It took us a long time. Cliff Bentz, who's now in Congress, was the lead negotiator for the Republicans. And, it took a long time, didn't it? I hate to repeat myself, but it takes a long time because guess what? There's folks out in Ontario that have some really strong opinions. There's folks in John Day and Burns and, Medford. You got trucking industry, you've got, suburban parents, you've got, folks that don't own cars that are advocating for expanded bike lanes. You got some folks who want a seat at the table that don't want any combustion engines used in the state of Oregon, right? So it takes a long time to do that. We eventually struck a deal. And I remember when we struck the deal because Cliff Bentz said to me hey, I have good news and bad news. And I said, well, what's the good news? He says, well, I got $3 million put in for improving, school lanes or whatever, to schools in Prineville. And I said, well, that's great. What's the bad news? He says, you're now voting for the biggest gas tax increase in the history of Oregon. And, part of the deal is there were projects. And one of the main projects of that was fixing Cooley Road. Now, we all enjoy that right now because it's done now. I can get on at Colorado and drive clear to Applebee's in Redmond without a stoplight now. And so one of us, and it had to be a Republican from Central Oregon, had to vote. And that's how it was done, is there were projects, there were different interests. It was quintessential sausage, but people were obligated to vote instead of just divide into red team versus blue team, right? What happened this last year, unfortunately, is the folks negotiating weren't able to stick it out. And then it became blue team versus red team. And then the governor came in and developed a style of, twisted arms, etc. And so it was like, okay, well, if you're going alone, then go alone. And here we are. And I just don't think that was the right approach. It was not the right approach by Governor Kotek. It was not the right approach by legislative leadership in 2025. And now we're delayed, and we shouldn't have been. What we need to do is exactly what Anthony just said, and in Emerson, is get back to the table, all the interests, both political parties, and hammer out a deal. And when you do that, you're obligated to vote for it. And I'll vote for it if it's done that way. I've always supported transportation votes. I go home to a pretty conservative district and I take my lumps. And I remember going home and, how could you vote for that? And I listened. And I remember Frank Martinez said to me, you voted to put a sales tax on bikes, because there was a $10 fee as part of that deal because we wanted bike lanes and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Frank, when was the last time you rode a bike? And he said, well, that's a good point. But you know what? I went home and took my lumps and I explained my vote. And guess what? People were like, yeah, okay. And I got reelected. So Republicans and Democrats will be able to take that vote if it's something we all produce. And we need to produce it. I agree. We want to produce it.
Jason, yeah.
Just briefly, I agree with much of what's been said here. From a governor's perspective, May is the right time to have that on the ballot, so we can continue to do the work. We can't wait until November and expect to have, a month and a half before we walk into the building and figure this out. And historically, that's what we've done, put things like this on the May ballot. And I think what you hear is a ton of core values when it comes to transportation infrastructure. Right, we all want safe roads. We all want that passed, plowed in a safe and appropriate and timely manner. And we all have infrastructure needs in our districts. And part of the challenge is the infrastructure needs are different, right? There is a need for all of us that we have a workable I-5 bridge. It's felt a little more acutely over there. And the price tag of that project is astronomical compared to the projects that we have in Central Oregon and Eastern Oregon. But we have to come up with a funding model that is equitable throughout the state so that our infrastructure needs are met. I think what the governor is doing right now makes sense, right? She has this large stakeholder group to try to figure out what are the different infrastructure needs, what are those core priorities, put together some options for us about what our transportation system should look like, and then get to work on how we fund it. The reality is, given inflation, given greater fuel efficiency, given electric vehicles, we don't have some projected revenue for the basic transportation needs that we have in the state. So there is a lot more work ahead of us. I take this conversation as optimistic that all four of us, and I think we're reflective of the body in general, are going to continue to work on this and figure out a solution for this long term.
We'll start with you, Senator Broadman. Given the severity of pending cuts to food stamps and Oregon state health plans, how is the state positioned to absorb and respond to these changes, and what is being done at the budgetary level to prepare?
Yeah, this is what, we'll talk about all of these bills that are really important, but I'll be honest, the work that we did this year in the short session and the work that we're doing in the long session next year is going to be largely focused on this question. We are not a state with a general fund that can backfill what the federal government is, I believe, inappropriately depriving the state of. Food, public safety, healthcare, housing, the core areas of partnership with the federal government, the state government, and local government have always shared, right? So I think there's a couple answers. One, there's an election between now and the long session. And my expectation is that this administration has shown the American people exactly who it is. It's making life more expensive and less safe. And that we will have a referendum on that to slow down the sort of progress towards chaos and tyranny that this administration is driving us toward. I'm also not going to sit here and say that there's a revenue or a budget solution to the federal government depriving Oregonians of the tax dollars that we are entitled to. These are our tax dollars, right? The money that is being stolen from Oregonians in the form of taking away food stamps, cutting housing, taking away our health care. That's our money. That's the whole point of this experiment. So my expectation is, there will be a lot of desire to backfill on, particularly on healthcare, and the state general fund is not in a position to do. There are things that we are doing very effectively. We need to fight waste, inefficiency, fraud. We can do that at the state level and not be cruel, not be inhumane, not ignore the values that make this the greatest place to live. I would also just note that we've already, in the short sessions, 35 days, and we met the moment on affordability. We undertook the largest, and we all supported this aspect of the legislation. We undertook the largest expansion in the history of our state of the earning and tax credit, which is to keep more money in the pockets of low and moderate income Oregonians. So none of what is happening it's sort of in the chaos in Washington, D.C. allows us to abdicate our responsibility to fight for Oregonians on affordability and safety and healthy communities. We will keep doing that, but we also can't be deluded by the idea that there's a state budget tool to backfill what the federal government steals from us. It's going to be tough.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd like to offer a rebuttal. But this is what's great about Central Oregon is, we all serve together. We have different views about things, but we have great relationships and we stick it out. And that's really what's required in the time in front of us. Is we have to remember this is about relationships and our kids, and people send representatives and they expect us to stick it out, to have meals together, and to disagree and continue to work. And so I don't believe that Oregon is suffering from chaos. And that's what's from the Trump administration, and that's why where we are with the budget. I think we've gotten here over decisions over quite a length of time. I'd like to say that under the Biden administration, 20 million people crossing our border without authorization was kind of a form of chaos. All right, so we can disagree about how to characterize it. What we can't disagree is that we are $39.1 trillion of national debt. And it doesn't matter who the next president is. If 85% of the federal budget's baked in, and you look at the demographics of America, we're going to be at 50 trillion in a blink of an eye. In fact, if you ask the question, if everyone lived out the actuary tables today in America, and we had steady growth in taxation revenue, how much debt do we run up just to meet obligations? Does anyone know? 120 trillion. This is not sustainable. This was not done by Donald Trump. This has been done by every federal administration and your Senator Ron Wyden and your Senator Jeff Merkley. This has been done by both branches repeatedly. We have run up a national debt and put it on our children and grandchildren. So now what do? Well, now what's going to happen is there's going to be reduction in what the feds send to the states, net of inflation, regardless of who's president. And they're going to squeeze what's down to the states. So let's talk about the squeeze. Let's talk about SNAP and healthcare. Who knows the error rates in Oregon in SNAP?
I think Emerson did.
Do you know?
14%, I believe, right?
Well, no, that's maybe where it is now. Do you know where it started last year?
No.
22%. So you've got states out there whose error rates are 5%. And Oregon had an error rate of 22%, which means Oregon had on its SNAP rolls and its Oregon Health Plan a vast quantity of people who weren't supposed to be there. And so what the federal government did is said, listen, we're going to reduce your reimbursement rates for Medicaid and these programs based upon your error rate. And it's designed to drive all the states' error rates down. Okay? So did they kick people off Medicaid? Well, what they told Oregon is you're going to get reimbursed less if you don't get your error rates down. So what did Oregon do? They started actually getting their error rates down, which means auditing people, checking up on people. Are you supposed to be on? You're supposed to be not. So it wasn't quite characterized as this madman in DC who just wreaked havoc, right? I think that's a political view and it's a partisan view. I think what we really have to deal with Oregon is realize that we have gotten here over a series of years. Oregon has expanded its budget, quadrupled it in 20 years. 10 years or so, we've doubled. I mean, you could go into what Oregon spends money on in our general fund and the pressure to backfill, like Representative Prop just mentioned. We backfilled out of her general fund to subsidize Planned Parenthood because the federal government had said, no, we're specifically not. Now, I'm not defending that decision. I don't agree with everything the Trump administration does. But my point is, the pressure to backfill on our general fund is high, and we don't have that money available.
Let me let Jason.
Well, so I'd say this, right? The national debt has been a longstanding issue, right? I'll agree with you on that, Mike. The price of gas has gone up $1 in the last month. I know why that's happened. The price of consumer goods have gone up because of tariffs imposed by Donald Trump, right? Those are decisions made by the Trump administration that are directly impacting the cost of living here in Oregon and throughout the country. And in the backdrop of those decisions to raise the cost of living, the Trump administration decided to cut food stamps and cut access to healthcare. That is a problem. That is not governance. That is not taking care of the core responsibilities that we have to folks. When Anthony talked about chaos, part of it is like a third or so of our budget is federal dollars, right? Tax dollars that we pay that come back. And so a third of our budget is federal dollars. That's how we pay for food stamps. That's how we pay for the Oregon Health Plan, which a third of the people in this country in this state access. 50% of the kids are on the Oregon Health Plan. 40% of the people east of here are on the Oregon Health Plan. That's $9 federal dollars for every state dollar, right? And so on the federal level, when you have instability and you have starting a war, raising price of gases, deciding to cut food stamps, deciding to cut access to health care, that makes governance on the state level incredibly, incredibly challenging. I don't have a problem with there being some tension between levels of government, right? You don't like the same person to be mayor, governor, and county commissioner. And if you look at some of the most successful things we've done, we've all been to a ribbon cutting in this community, a housing project or an education project, where it's been federal partnership with state partnership and local partnership. We are not in that time period. We are in a period of instability and chaos on the federal level, and it is trickling down on the state level, making it incredibly difficult to govern and be responsible for those core responsibilities. We are going to figure out a way to do that, but it is going to be a series of difficult decisions next legislative session.
Emerson?
Yeah, I think this conversation just shows like how challenging it is to govern right now. I just want to pick up on something that Rob said, is that partnership. And what we're lacking right now is a true partner in the federal government, and that is exactly why it's hard to govern. But to go back to what your original question was, right, it was about food. And how are we going to figure out how to feed people, right? And that's where we need the federal government, our philanthropist partners in the state to all be partners. And when we lose a leg of that stool, it's really, really challenging. But I don't ever want us to lose sight of who we're feeding and what we're doing, right? So I grew up a hungry kid. When I would go to school, and it's not because we were poor, it's because my mom had a lot of challenges. And I remember once I opened my brown bag and there was one piece of like white Wonder Bread, and that was it. And when I think about elementary school, I think about being hungry. Like that's like the first thing that pops into my mind. And so when we talk about chaos and budgets and all those things, we have to fix it, but we also have to remember the people that we serve and our obligation. And I think that's the disappointing part for me and our federal partners. I think they've lost sight of those kids that are hungry, and I'm hopeful that they find their North Star again and join us. And what I think is just a basic American value that kids don't go hungry. And so we'll see what happens. But I would say if you look at all of it, not just SNAP, even EPA stuff, as someone who teaches natural resource law, we're losing a partner in some of the most basic stuff that we're doing. And I think that partnership is important. I think that partnership is a fundamental American value. And, the voters will decide if they want that, what they want that partnership to look like.
Okay, couldn't agree.
So because we're going to have to do more. Just whoever we all want to blame, if it's Biden or Trump or whoever's next president, we're going to have to do more with probably less. And the key there is to grow our economy so that we have the resources that we know local, state government needs in order to meet our most basic core obligations: education, public safety, and healthcare. We are doing a great job here. Central Oregon is leading the way. We grew 15,000 jobs over the last 5 years, while Multnomah County dropped by about 20,000. So give yourselves credit for leading the way in the state, which is robust economic growth, in order to pay for the more things that we're going to need to do at the government level in this K-shaped economy, helping the people who need it the most. And I know with our strong economic growth here that the rest of the state is looking at us.
Like you want to say anything, agree?
In conclusion, what was that? In conclusion, just overall?
Just on what we're saying before we move to Audrey's question.
Okay, well, I was in the House, left and did some other things. And when this Senate seat became open, I raised my hand and got elected because of the budget. Now, that's not my only concern. I was concerned about the rule of law, due process. I was concerned about some of the things. But bottom line is, I look at the numbers. Math wins. Math is not Democrat or Republican. Math is not conservative or liberal. Math is math. I looked at the math. And anybody who I've sat down with, when we look at the math and we look at where the state government is in Oregon, where we are in light of our national story, in the pressures on the federal government, I realize that Oregon has an opportunity because it's running head on in the math. 30 cents on every dollar that goes to our schools now goes to PERS and legacy obligations. That's one issue. There are many, many. We are going to have to accept in this generation that for the first time perhaps in our lives, from the government standpoint, we're going to have to do as much or more on less. And that means this generation is going to have to make some sacrifices for the sake of the next and your grandkids.
We will now turn to some audience questions. I do want to put a plug in for next month's City Club, in that we were going to ask questions about the changes to the transient room tax and what that's going to mean, but we're going to do a whole forum on it. So we're going to just let that one slide and move into audience questions. So Amber, you want to?
Yep, I just want to remind everybody that we want to get to as many questions as possible, so please keep your questions brief and make sure they end in a question mark. And I promise Marcus LeGrand, he gets the first question because he has to go teach.
Morning, how y'all doing? Hey, thank you for your service. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the hard work that y'all do. This is primarily going to go to Senator McClain. I'm in education. I'm always looking at things being cut. A lot of us coming from the federal level. What is the strategy for all of you in McLean? You can answer this, mostly you. What are we going to do to try to make sure we continue to get the funding? So we got to buy in coming out pretty soon, and we want to definitely make sure we have the resources to do this. So what's the strategy to make sure we continue to get our funding?
One, the first strategy is Oregon needs to recognize where we are. And we are, with the current generation of kids in our schools, declining enrollments, maybe not necessarily here in Central Oregon, but statewide. And because of the decisions of generations before us, there is a 30% burden that we're having to just pay off. So is it fair to have these kids pay that cost? I don't think so. Which means we're going to have to put more in K-12. Here's an interesting thing. There was a bill passed in 2019 called the Student Success Act. Wonderful name. It was a sales tax. It was a gross receipts tax. It's called a corporate activities tax, or the CAT tax. When that bill passed, it was said it was a dedicated fund for education. And then what happened is the legislature, in the hands of one government or one party, and this is, you're right, I'm criticizing them for this. They then took what was previously funded at the general fund level and reduced it. And then took the amount that came in new and put that on K-12 and said, oh, we increased. That was called budget gamemanship. There's a great podcast on it this week. I'm on it. We talk about it. And we go into the details. So what it means is we have to get back to our core services. One of them is education and our commitment to our kids, which means we're going to have to put more money in it. The question that I have is the Oregon Education Association, the union that represents the teachers, willing to also make concessions? If the taxpayers make concessions, the teachers make concessions, the school district makes concessions, all the grown-ups make concessions, we can make sure our kids are given what they deserve. My plan is to try to bring all three of those to the table and get concessions we need for a 10 to 20 year plan. That's what I'd like to have happen.
How do you make concessions when teachers can't even afford to live here? I'm curious.
Well, are you saying that teachers should not make concessions? I mean, isn't that the issue? Nobody wants to make concessions.
These are teachers who are teaching. Who's going to take care of you when you're in your 90s? Like, who's going to be running the town someday? Students. But if teachers can't afford to live here, how are these kids supposed to learn and advocate for the future?
So are you talking about the cost of housing, or are you talking about salaries for teachers?
I'm talking about both.
Okay, you're talking about both. I didn't even actually describe to anyone here what concessions, and yet already it's opposed.
Nope. I'm asking,
Hey,
what are the concerns?
I just want to weigh in right now, like, I really don't want this to turn
If-
into a town hall, and I appreciate your answer to the question. Let's stay with Amber and the mic and let her answer.
Can I answer part of tearing off what Summer had said? I think we have an opportunity, and between school board member LeGrand and school board member Chadwick's work here locally, we have an opportunity to recognize where we are falling short for our kids. I support spending more on education. Let me just say that right now. We need to spend more money on education. We have existing costs that teachers have worked for in the form of their retirement. That is a reality. We've also made some major reform when it comes to PERS. We have to pay teachers in order to do the most important job we have in our society, and that's to educate our children. And our kids need to go to school more days a year, period. Like it's not that complicated. So we're not gonna do that by saying, hey, teachers, work for free like another week, right? This is not how America or education or government works. We're gonna have to spend more money on education. The efficiencies that Senator McClain is talking about, they're difficult. We have a governor who is leading. I'm hopeful that we have some news today on some additional instructional time. But until our kids are going to school for the number of days, at least across our country, that is average, and the unions are gonna have to be okay with it, and the school boards are gonna have to be okay with it, the Republicans and Democrats and legislature are gonna have to live with it. Until we get our kids to school an average number of days a year, we are failing, period.
And if we look at Washington, if a kid enters kindergarten, graduates at 12th grade, that kid in Washington is going to be in the classroom 1 year more than the kid in Oregon. That's not acceptable.
Let me let them listen.
So as I have a fifth grader, she's at outdoor school right now in this weather. But so I think that Oregonian parents, not about budget, they're pretty disappointed in our education system. I'm a believer in public schools. I want to win, and I'm sick of losing. I'm sick of being 47th. Are you sick of being 47th? I'm over it. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to have more days and hours. We already got the cell phones out of the room. Now we're going to come for different types of technology. And we're going to follow, or what I want us to follow is the Mississippi model, where they brought themselves from the bottom to the top. I think the budget will come when people see results. But right now they're saying, you want more money and I'm not seeing results? Like, I thought about putting my child in a private school, right? And I am a public school champion. We have a problem and we need to say it out loud. We have a problem, we're losing, but we can win. And I think collectively, and if we all just like put our shoulders to the wheel, we can win. Mississippi did, we can too.
No, I mean, well, do I get to say in conclusion?
Please.
Well, on the PERS issue, we've had multiple iterations of PERS, right? What Mike's talking about is a PERS system that existed long before any of us served, and the current PERS system that we have for current employees will not have some of the issues that Mike had talked about. We have significantly increased school funding. We were near the bottom, and now we're in the middle, and our outcomes haven't kept pace with that. So that's the next challenge: how do we close that delta between where we are on school funding and where we are on outcomes, and how do we work with our local school boards and our local schools to make that happen. I agree with a lot of what's said here. It's about instructional time, making sure our kids are in that classroom, and it's about having high quality educators, right? And you can't have high quality educators if you don't have a higher education system that produces those high quality educators, and you can't have that system if you're not going to pay them a living wage, right? I think about if my child wanted to be a teacher, would have to go to college and then have to go to grad school, and she wanted to be a teacher here in Bend, how would my child figure out a way to own a home and do those types of things that we want for that workforce? We have some challenges ahead of us, and I know our school board members feel it. I do think one of the sort of slight silver linings is we have been putting money in reserves for our schools. I think we're at 1.2 or 1.3 billion dollars. We have a school only basically savings account. So we are prepared for tougher financial times to create some stability in our education funding moving forward.
Thank you.
Good morning, Jillian Yoker, City of Bend, and I want to ask a softball question, actually, in follow-up to something that Senator McLean said earlier. When you look at the number of bills coming before you each session, it seems overwhelming, the amount of work you have. Sometimes it's better to do less better. There was a bill, I think, that didn't pass around constraining the number of bills. What do you think are the pros and cons, and do you think that will come back?
I support the bill limits. I think the minority leader in each chamber should have like unlimited or a certain number just to protect them from being rolled by the majority. I'm a committee chair, so I get committee bills, which also is another tool that I have. But having unlimited personal bills in the long session is, I think is too expensive for the amount of money we're spending on staff, legislative time, and frankly, as you said, to do good work. So I would support bill limits within reason, 10, 15, 20. If you're really, there's not enough time to pass 20 bills, unless you're Emerson Levy.
17 lined up so far.
I agree with it. I think we should be sort of more focused. I think the counter argument that I've heard from legislators who don't support it, they do think it is sort of a freedom of speech issue and a governance issue. Sometimes people introduce bills as a discussion starter, not necessarily a piece of legislation that's going to pass, or introduce bills on behalf of constituents, even if maybe that bill isn't like a good idea but not fully ready. I do think there is a balance there to make sure we can elevate certain issues and have those discussions, but be focused, right? When you chair a committee and you get a bunch of bills assigned, you know how many days you have for public hearing and you're trying to balance having all those discussions. I do think it'd be better if we were more focused and we did have limits on the amount of legislation that was drafted.
I'm a tad old-fashioned in that I believe 145,000 constituents in my Senate district deserve to be heard. So I don't believe in bill limits in the long session. I believe in committee chairs not giving hearings to every bill. And I think that's where we streamline it. And I was mixed feelings about the particular limitation on the long session, given that there were, several legislators that had over 100 bills and et cetera. The more I reflected on it, the more I thought, a lot of those bills, in some of my bills, are because constituents or city, a small town or something, they want to have their voice heard on an issue. And so for that reason, I would oppose limits in the long session.
Next question.
In terms of the theme of sacrifice, which all of you endorse and one specifically asked us to consider, 35 days of a short session was blamed as a problem by all of you. That's less than 5 weeks. How come it's so short, and why do you try to do everything in such a limited time?
That is a great question. It was put on the ballot. Oregonians chose to amend our constitution to allow for even year sessions. And it was sold on the idea that we would just do budget tweaks and policy tweaks or address what are important statewide issues at the time. And like all things, it morphed. And so I just think it takes the discipline of our legislative leadership to get back to that. And regardless of the bill that's introduced, if it doesn't fit in those categories, then it probably should be sidelined. But at the end of the day, it was a lot of work, but I think we were able to address, budget tweaks, and we had to. And we address a statewide issue like Senate Bill 1517 for immunity.
And Dr. Blair, I would say we are going to bellyache a lot about being gone from Central Oregon for 35 days. Nothing makes you love Ben Redmond Sisters more than living in Salem. But I love the short session. The short session is a pressure cooker. The short session is what enabled this group to bring back $42 million for OSU Cascades student representation. But the short session is what enabled us to disconnect from the Trump tax scheme, tax cuts for billionaires. I'm not sure we have another month in us that gets done. The short session is what allows us to stand up and fight in the form of 9+ bills against overreach by the federal government. So I would take a short session every year. And I think it also distills what's important. What's important is budget. What's important is standing up and making sure that people are safe and fighting for real, actual affordability for Oregonians. So short session was great, even though it was hard.
Since we're running out of time, maybe you want to take another question.
My question ties into what they've already asked, but it begs the question is it time based on the complicated system and the way Oregon and the world has gotten? Do we go to a full-time session? I know how Senator Broadman feels about it, I think already, but I'd love to hear a yes or no. Would our government be better if we went to a full-time Oregon legislature?
Jason.
So for some background, there used to just be the long session, right? So people would, odd years for 5.5, 6 months, and then there wouldn't be anything scheduled. If there was something needed, there could be an emergency session called. Okay. Then we did the 35 days, and I think the theory was it was going to be tweaks. And I will say, I think what's happening now is people are starting to treat the short session like a long session, just shorter. And I do think it is important that we come back and have a period of governance every year. There are different ideas floating out there. Maybe we shrink the long session and add some of that time to the second year, sort of balance it out. The question of whether it's full-time legislature or not, I think there is a value in a citizens legislature. I think there's a value that Representative Eastapure is a farmer, and we have legislators that are teachers and nurses. There's a few of us that are lawyers. There's people that are retired, people that have younger children, and there's an age range. And so I don't want to lose that. I want to lose the 90 of us kind of coming from different parts of the state with different professional and personal backgrounds. And I worry, I'm not opposed to that conversation about what our sessions would look like, but I am worried if we move to a full-time legislature, we might miss or lose out on some of that sort of diversity of legislators when we're making policies. I mean, it is there's like real value in having people walk into this building with different professional and personal experiences and helping shape the legislation that we work on.
Hi, thanks for this session. I am impressed every time I come to these, how deeply you guys think out things and work together. I think values are incredibly important, and I like how you talk about leveraging Central Oregon values. A couple of them that I heard today were the need to sit and discuss and share perspectives and work together for a solution, and that process being critical to being able to buy into it. Another one I heard from Senator McLean about math and how important math is, and we need to have factual conversations. So my challenge to that math assertion is that many economists talk about how critical immigrants are to enabling economic growth in our country, how they contribute more to the economy than they take from it because they don't get the same benefits, yet they pay taxes through payroll, and how the crime rate is about half of what it is for all Americans. Immigrants commit less crimes. Also math about the big beautiful bill and its impact on our debt, which you discussed, and its reduction of services, also having immense benefits for the super rich. Those are math calculations. ICE, the cost of ICE, the cost of detention centers, these are mathematical calculations. Does that kind of math factor in to your calculus?
Well, first of all, I've actually read studies on the costs. And so, perhaps we should share each other's studies. So I do believe that, first of all, nations have borders. And that I think we should have a border. And that immigration here should be legal. Right? That's what the law says. Law hasn't been changed no matter who's been in charge. Number two, we proposed a compromise. I led that to say, look, we have a lot of immigrant protections being proposed by the majority party in this short session. We said, hey, could we compromise on this? If someone who's here and they're not a citizen and they commit a heinous felony, could we at least acknowledge an ICE detainer on them? And then when they're done serving their sentence, tell ICE who has a detainer on them, this person's being released on this day at this prison so they can be picked up and deported. And we were told no. In 2021, Oregon passed an expansion of its sanctuary state, which doesn't even allow our Department of Corrections, our prisons, to even acknowledge ICE detainers. And so, is that math? So there is a certain amount of math, like for an example, billionaires bad unless they buy the Blazers, right? And they want us to fund 300 some million into redoing the Moda Center. So that billionaire good, this billionaire bad. To a certain extent, I didn't vote for H.R. 1, the big beautiful bill. And I'm not here to defend the Trump administration and all that it does. But I am here to say there are reasonable views that Oregon should acknowledge. And so when I talk about math, I step back and say, look, regardless of this partisan tribalism that's going on, which we all hear about, could we at least acknowledge that $39.1 trillion of debt isn't good? And it's projected, regardless of the administration, debts will run up under Republican administrations and Democrat administrations. And I'm for one saying, look, regardless of how you view that, math is going to require that this state look at how it appropriates its general fund and how we raise revenue and deal with the next 10, 20 years of the squeeze. And I think that squeeze is going to be driven by math. And how that squeeze takes place is going to differ depending on the federal administration. But the squeeze is coming.
Can I just, since the last thing you mentioned was immigration, I just want to just sort of reiterate what the legislature accomplished. I think what we're seeing out of the federal government as part of its attack on our economy and our way of life is reducing legal immigration. The efforts, the $75 billion that we're wasting in some form at the federal government level related to ICE, this is actually having the opposite effect of what many who support stronger borders are suggesting they want, which is legal immigration, which is part of our economy, which is part of why all of us, unless you are a First People, are here. We are a country of immigrants. So recognizing that immigration is a beautiful part of the fabric of our state, we actually invested $8 million this year in universal representation to step into that gap where the federal government is clearly failing economically and morally, and ensure that people who are here legally have a path to their work documents, have a path to being able to be safe when they travel to and from their place of work, and be a part of our community, be a part of our economy. So I want to focus on the positive, because you all stepped up and supported a significant investment in making sure that people who are here legally, who are Oregonians, have the papers to prove that. So
Thanks.
thank you.
We are out of time. Jason, if you want to take another second, you want to take a minute?
I was just going to reiterate when your comment struck me, I was remembering, well, let me say something about all the information about the release dates from the Department of Correction is publicly available. Everybody in this room could get on the Department of Correction website and see when somebody's going to be released from prison, ICE officers included. But I was reflecting on your question, the very first meeting I had in 2021 where somebody brought up immigration with Oregon nursery growers, right? And we saw that this summer where farmers in the Hood River area who had a workforce that would come and help them, they didn't have the workforce that they needed, that they left crops on the trees and on the vines. So it's a real challenge when what's happening in the federal level, it's a challenge for our farmers, and it's a challenge for a number of businesses in the state what's happening.
I have to say in conclusion, finally, it's my turn. I just want to say, in conclusion, how grateful I am to serve with my colleagues up here, and we do disagree. We all fall different places on the political spectrum, but it's through that disagreement that we build stronger policy, and that is what will build leadership in Salem and for the state. And all of us have been part of major negotiations, and I'm just really proud that Central Oregon and the way that we interact with each other is leading the way in Salem. And as always, we are always available to you. I even got someone's horseback the other day, so there is no constituent service that is too big or too small, and that we're always just here to serve you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you to all of our representatives for being here today. We know you guys are coming off of the pressure cooker of the short session and are probably hopefully having time with your families these days. But we really appreciate your accessibility and sharing your insights into what we wanted to know about and how policy coming out of Salem is affecting us here in Central Oregon. So thank you again to our representatives for the input. Thank you to all of you for being here as well. Your questions are what make City Club so robust and so important, and the dialogue that we can bring to the community is really what our mission is. So thank you for your contributions. On that note, I just want to remind you the 20 for 20 campaign that we are kicking off this month in celebration of our 20th anniversary. There's a poster by the registration desk with a QR code. There'll be more information coming your way if you want to help support City Club in bringing more conversations like this for the next 20 years. And then Aaron already mentioned next month we are looking at tourism, especially the transient lodging tax and kind of a deep dive into that. So be on the lookout for that, and then some more great programming for the rest of the year. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the lunchtime.